I'm Sarah Martinez, 34, emergency room physician at St. Mary's Medical Center. I am known for my quick decision-making under pressure and my ability to handle the most critical cases. Recently, I completed my residency and am building my career while navigating family expectations about marriage and children. The scent of my mother's arroz con pollo hung heavy in the dining room air, but tonight it turned my stomach instead of welcoming me home. I gripped my wine glass tighter as my father's voice took on that familiar tone, the one that meant someone was about to become his evening's entertainment, and tonight, that someone was me. 34 years old and still no husband, he declared to our dinner guests, gesturing with his fork like a conductor directing an orchestra of humiliation. Around the table sat my Aunt Carmen, Uncle Roberto, their daughter Sophia with her new fiancé, and the Hernandezes from down the street, complete with their recently married son Miguel, who'd just bought his second house. The words sliced through the warm air like a scalpel through skin. I felt every pair of eyes shift toward me, some sympathetic, others curious, all uncomfortable. Sophia's engagement ring caught the chandelier light, throwing tiny rainbows across the white tablecloth like scattered promises I'd apparently failed to collect. "Papa," I said quietly, hoping the childhood endearment might soften what was coming. "Can we please not do this tonight?" But he was already warming up, the second bottle of wine having loosened whatever filter usually kept his disappointment private. My mother's hand fluttered to her pearl necklace, her nervous tell that meant she wanted to intervene but wouldn't dare contradict him in front of company. "Not do what?" "Tell the truth." His voice carried across the room like a judge delivering a verdict. "You spend all your time in that hospital, playing with other people's emergencies instead of building a life. Look at Miguel. Married, house, promotion at the bank. This is what success looks like, not running around in scrubs at all hours." The familiar burn of shame crept up my throat. This performance had played out countless times before, but never with such a large audience. Never with Miguel Hernandez sitting there, probably thanking God his parents had raised a more conventional daughter. "Sarah works very hard," my mother attempted, her voice barely audible above the clink of silverware. "She saves lives." "She's wasting her life," my father shot back, his accent thickening with emotion and wine. 34 years old, no husband, no children, living alone like some spinster. When I was her age, I had 3 children and owned my own business. Before I go further, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and if you're hooked already, a like and subscribe will keep these stories coming. The silence stretched like a rubber band about to snap. My Aunt Carmen shifted in her chair, the leather creaking under the weight of her discomfort. Sophia stared at her plate with the intensity of someone trying to disappear, while her fiancé studied the family photos on the wall like they contained the secrets of the universe. "That's different, Papa," my younger brother Carlos tried from across the table. "Sarah's a doctor. She went to medical school for 8 years. To what end?" My father's laugh was sharp, bitter. "So she can work herself to death taking care of strangers? So she can come home to an empty apartment every night? This is not what we sacrificed for." The room felt like it was closing in. I could hear the tick of the antique clock on the mantel, could smell the faint scent of my mother's gardenia perfume mixing with the lingering aroma of dinner, could feel the weight of every expectation I'd apparently failed to meet pressing down on my shoulders. My father wasn't finished. "Look at Sophia," he continued, raising his glass toward my cousin. 28, engaged to a good man, planning a family. She understands what matters. Not like Sarah, who thinks playing doctor is more important than being a woman. Something cold and sharp settled in my chest, different from the usual hurt. I thought about last Tuesday, about performing CPR on a 6-year-old who'd been hit by a car, about the moment his heart started beating again under my hands. About his mother's tears when I told her he was going to be okay. About the thank you letter from a family whose father I'd saved from a heart attack, now framed in my office. "Papa, that's enough," Carlos said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Enough." My father's eyes were bright with wine and righteous indignation. "I'm just getting started. 34 years old with nothing to show for it. No husband, no children, no real life. Just playing dress-up in a hospital, pretending she's important. The words hung in the air like smoke. Around the table, forks had stopped moving, conversations had died, and even the grandfather clock seemed to pause between ticks. My mother's face had gone pale, and she kept glancing between my father and me like she was watching a car accident in slow motion. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor with a sound that seemed to echo through the sudden silence. My father looked up at me, his eyes slightly unfocused, probably expecting me to excuse myself and retreat to my childhood bedroom to cry like I had when I was 17. Instead, I looked directly at him, then let my gaze sweep across the table, taking in each face, my aunt's mortified expression, my uncle's studied neutrality, Miguel's obvious discomfort, my mother's pleading eyes, Sophia's wide-eyed shock. When I spoke, my voice carried the same calm authority I used when calling time of death in the emergency room. Last month, I brought a 3-year-old back from the dead after she drowned in a swimming pool, and her first word when she woke up was "Mama." The silence that followed was complete, absolute, like the moment between lightning and thunder. But as I watched my father's face change, watched something flicker behind his eyes that might have been shame or recognition or something else entirely, I heard the distinct sound of the front door opening, a soft click that no one else seemed to notice. Footsteps echoed from the entryway, slow and deliberate, belonging to someone who definitely shouldn't have been in our house. The footsteps grew closer, deliberate and unhurried, while my family remained frozen in the aftermath of my words. My father's mouth hung slightly open, the wine glass suspended halfway to his lips like a photograph caught mid-motion. The silence stretched so tight I could hear my own heartbeat drumming against my ribs. "Hello, Martinez family." The voice that cut through our stunned quiet was smooth, familiar, and completely impossible. I turned toward the dining room entrance, my body moving like I was underwater, and felt the world tilt sideways. Dr. James Morrison stood in our doorway, still wearing his navy suit from the hospital board meeting, his silver hair perfectly styled despite the late hour. The chief of surgery at St. Mary's Medical Center, my boss, my mentor, the man who'd fought the board to get me my position in the emergency department, was standing in my parents' dining room like he belonged there. "Dr. Morrison?" The words came out as barely a whisper. Around the table, my family stared with a collective expression of people witnessing a miracle or a catastrophe, unsure which. He smiled, that same warm expression he wore when delivering good news to families in the waiting room. "I hope you don't mind the intrusion. Your mother invited me." My head snapped toward my mother, who was suddenly very interested in smoothing her napkin across her lap. Her cheeks had flushed pink, and she wouldn't meet my eyes. "Mama?" I managed. "I may have mentioned to Dr. Morrison that you were having dinner with the family tonight," she said quietly, her accent thickening with nervousness. "And I may have suggested he was welcome to join us if he was in the neighborhood." My father had finally found his voice. "You're Sarah's boss?" He set down his wine glass with exaggerated care, his earlier bravado evaporating like steam. "I am indeed." Dr. Morrison stepped fully into the room, and I noticed he carried a manila folder under his arm. Though I prefer to think of myself as her colleague. Sarah is one of the finest emergency physicians I've had the privilege to work with in 30 years of medicine. The words hit the room like a defibrillator shock. My Aunt Carmen's eyebrows shot up, so high they nearly disappeared into her hairline. Miguel Hernandez leaned forward slightly, suddenly interested in a conversation that had nothing to do with banking or real estate. Sophia's fiancé whispered something in her ear that made her eyes widen. "Please sit," my mother said, jumping up to pull out the chair next to mine. "Can I get you a plate?" "Coffee. Coffee would be wonderful, thank you." Dr. Morrison settled into the chair with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to commanding rooms full of people. "I actually came by because I have some news for Sarah that couldn't wait until Monday." My stomach dropped. In my experience, news that couldn't wait was rarely good news. I thought about the difficult case last week, the patient who'd coded twice before we stabilized him, the family who'd threatened to sue when we couldn't save their father from his third heart attack. "What kind of news?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Dr. Morrison opened the manila folder and pulled out a thick document with official letterhead. The American College of Emergency Physicians has selected you for the Young Physician Excellence Award. It's given to only 5 emergency doctors nationwide each year, recognizing exceptional skill, dedication, and impact on patient care. The words seemed to echo in the suddenly airless room. I stared at the document he placed in front of me, seeing my name printed in formal black letters, but unable to process what it meant. The award comes with a $50,000 research grant and an invitation to present your work on pediatric trauma protocols at the National Conference in Chicago, Dr. Morrison continued. Your paper on reducing mortality rates in childhood drowning cases has been accepted for publication in the Journal of Emergency Medicine. My father's face had gone through several color changes, settling on a pale gray that matched the tablecloth. Around the table, my family sat in stunned silence, as if Dr. Morrison had announced I'd been selected for a mission to Mars. I don't understand, I said, my hands trembling as I picked up the award letter. I just do my job. You do far more than that. Dr. Morrison's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. Last month alone, you saved 17 lives in the emergency department. 17 families went home intact because of your skill and dedication. The 3-year-old drowning victim you mentioned, that case is being studied by pediatric emergency departments across the country as an example of perfect crisis management. The irony wasn't lost on me. 5 minutes ago, my father had been telling a room full of people that I was wasting my life playing dress-up in a hospital. Now the chief of surgery was explaining that my work was being studied nationally. My mother returned with coffee, her hand shaking slightly as she set the cup in front of Dr. Morrison. Doctor, is Sarah really as good as you say? Mrs. Martinez, he said, accepting the coffee with a grateful nod. Your daughter is the kind of physician other doctors hope to become. She has a gift for seeing what others miss, for staying calm when everyone else panics, for making the impossible decisions that save lives. We're lucky to have her. I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. For the first time in years, sitting at this table where I'd been made to feel small and insufficient, I felt proud of who I'd become. My father cleared his throat, the sound rough and uncertain. Dr. Morrison, we didn't realize that your daughter is exceptional? Dr. Morrison's smile was kind but pointed. I understand. Sometimes we're too close to see clearly. But I can tell you that Sarah's reputation extends far beyond our hospital. She's been offered positions at Johns Hopkins, Mayo Clinic, and Massachusetts General. She stays with us because she believes in serving her community, in being close to family. The weight of those words settled over the table like a blanket. Job offers I'd never mentioned, opportunities I'd turned down to stay near home, near family who apparently saw my dedication as failure. Sarah, my Aunt Carmen said softly, why didn't you ever tell us about any of this? Before I could answer, Dr. Morrison's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression shifted to something more serious. I'm sorry, but I need to take this, he said, standing. Sarah, there's been a multi-car accident on I-95. We need you at the hospital. Now. The familiar surge of adrenaline kicked in, washing away the emotional exhaustion of the evening. This was what I was made for, the moment when everything else fell away, and only the work mattered. How many casualties? I asked, already pushing back from the table. At least 6, including 2 children. Life flight is bringing in the worst cases. I was moving before he finished speaking, my mind already shifting into emergency mode. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Sarah, wait. My father called as I headed for the door. I turned back, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time all evening. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of his own words and the reality of who I actually was. We'll talk when you get home, he said quietly. But as I grabbed my keys and headed for the door, Dr. Morrison's phone rang again. This time, when he answered, his face went completely white. What is it? I asked. He lowered the phone slowly, his eyes meeting mine with an expression I'd never seen before, something between fear and disbelief. Sarah, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. One of the victims in the accident. It's your brother Carlos. The world stopped. Everything, the ticking clock, my mother's sharp intake of breath, the distant hum of the refrigerator. All of it ceased to exist except for Dr. Morrison's words echoing in my head like a death knell. Carlos. My mother's voice cracked like breaking glass. She was on her feet before I could process what was happening, her chair toppling backward with a crash that seemed to come from another universe. How bad? The question came out of me automatically, my medical training overriding the sister who wanted to scream. My hands were already reaching for my phone, muscle memory taking over, when my mind couldn't function. Dr. Morrison's face was grave. Severe head trauma, possible internal bleeding. He's being airlifted to our trauma center now. Sarah, I need you to know. I'm coming with you, I said, cutting him off. I couldn't hear whatever he was about to tell me about Carlos's condition. Not yet. Not until I could see for myself, until I could put my hands on him and assess the damage with my own eyes. Mija, wait. My father's voice stopped me at the doorway. When I turned, he was standing too, his face ashen, all the wine-fueled arrogance drained away. I'm coming with you. We all are, my mother said, grabbing her purse with shaking hands. No. The word came out sharper than I intended, but I couldn't take it back. You can't all come to the trauma bay. It doesn't work that way. Dr. Morrison stepped forward gently. Sarah's right. Family members wait in the designated area. But Sarah... He paused, and I saw something flicker across his face that made my stomach clench. You can't treat him. You know that, right? You're too close. Dr. Patterson will handle the case. The rational part of my brain knew he was right. The emotional part wanted to tell him exactly where he could put hospital protocol. I need to see him. Of course. But as his sister, not his doctor. The drive to the hospital passed in a blur of streetlights and sirens. I followed Dr. Morrison's car while my parents sat in tense silence behind me, my mother clutching her rosary and whispering prayers in Spanish. Every red light felt like an eternity. Every turn brought us closer to answers I wasn't sure I wanted to hear. My phone buzzed with updates from the trauma team. Carlos was conscious, but disoriented. Possible skull fracture. Internal bleeding confirmed. Surgery likely. Each text felt like a physical blow, but I kept reading them, kept processing the medical information because it was the only way I could function. When we arrived at St. Mary's, the familiar smell of antiseptic and floor wax hit me like coming home and walking into a nightmare simultaneously. This was my domain, my territory, but tonight I was just another terrified family member being led to the waiting room. Dr. Martinez. Nurse Jennifer Chin appeared at my elbow, her usually cheerful demeanor subdued. Your brother is in Trauma Bay 3. Dr. Patterson is with him now. How is he? My mother asked, her accent thick with fear. Jennifer's eyes flicked to me, a silent question about how much to share. I nodded slightly. He's stable for now, she said carefully. The doctor will be out to speak with you as soon as possible. My father sank into one of the uncomfortable plastic chairs that I'd seen countless families occupy over the years. His hands shook as he loosened his tie, and for the first time in my life, he looked old. Fragile. This is my fault, he said quietly. Papa, don't. No, listen to me. His voice was rough, broken. Carlos left angry because of what I said to you, because of how I treated you in front of everyone. If I hadn't, he couldn't finish the sentence. My mother sat beside him, taking his hand. We don't know why he left, Roberto. We can't blame ourselves. But I was already putting the pieces together. Carlos had been quiet during dinner, uncomfortable with the way our father had humiliated me. He'd tried to defend me, and when that failed, he'd probably needed air, needed space, needed to get away from the toxic atmosphere our family dinners had become. Dr. Martinez? Dr. Patterson appeared in the waiting room doorway, still in his surgical scrubs. I'd worked with him dozens of times, had seen him deliver news both good and devastating, but I'd never been on the receiving end. We all stood at once, a family united by fear. Carlos is going to be okay, he said, and I felt my knees nearly buckle with relief. He has a concussion and some internal bleeding that we've managed to control. No surgery needed. He's asking for his sister. The walk to Carlos's room felt like the longest journey of my life. When I saw him lying in the hospital bed, his head bandaged, his face pale but alert, something inside me finally broke. "Hey, Humana," he said weakly, managing a small smile. "Heard you had quite the evening." I couldn't speak. I just took his hand and held it, feeling his pulse strong and steady under my fingers. "I'm sorry I left like that," he continued. "I just couldn't sit there and listen to Papa tear you down anymore. You save lives, Sarah. You're a hero, and he was treating you like a failure," I finished. "You're not a failure. You're the strongest person I know." Behind me, I heard my parents enter the room. My mother immediately went to Carlos's other side, fussing over his blankets and asking if he needed anything. My father hung back, uncertain. "Carlos," he said finally, his voice thick with emotion.
"I'm sorry."
"This is my fault."
"No, Papa."
"It's not." Carlos looked past me to our father. "But you owe Sarah an apology. A real one." The silence stretched between us, heavy with years of disappointment and misunderstanding. I thought about all the family dinners, all the times I'd been made to feel small, all the achievements that had gone unrecognized because they didn't fit the narrow definition of success my father had constructed. "Sarah," my father began, but before he could continue, Dr. Morrison appeared in the doorway. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said, "but Sarah, we need you. The other victims from the accident are arriving, and we're short-staffed. I know this is difficult timing, but I'll be right there," I said, already moving toward the door. This was who I was, what I did. Even with my brother lying in a hospital bed, even with my family's drama unresolved, people needed me. "Sarah, wait," my father called. I turned back, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time in years. He looked broken, humbled, like a man who'd finally understood the weight of his own words. "I'm proud of you," he said simply. I should have said that years ago. The words I'd waited my entire life to hear hung in the air between us. But before I could respond, before I could process what this moment meant, my pager went off with an urgent code. As I headed for the door, Dr. Morrison caught my arm. "Sarah," he said quietly, "there's something else about tonight's accident that you need to know. Something about why Carlos was on that road." The way he said it made my blood run cold. "What do you mean?" His expression was grave, almost fearful. "The police found something in Carlos's car. Something that suggests this wasn't just an accident." The fluorescent lights in the hospital corridor seemed to flicker as Dr. Morrison's words sank in. Around us, the familiar chaos of the emergency department continued, nurses rushing between rooms, monitors beeping, the distant sound of an ambulance siren, but everything felt muted, like I was hearing it through water. "What kind of something?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know the answer. Dr. Morrison glanced around, then guided me into an empty consultation room. The police found a threatening note in Carlos's glove compartment. Someone had been following him, Sarah. This accident, it might not have been an accident at all. The room tilted sideways. I gripped the edge of the desk to steady myself, my medical training warring with a sister who wanted to run back to Carlos's room and never leave his side. Following him? Why would anyone want to hurt Carlos? My voice sounded strange, distant. He's an accountant. He does taxes and helps small businesses with their books. He's the most harmless person in the world. That's what we need to figure out. Dr. Morrison's expression was grim. But right now, I need you to focus. We have 3 critical patients coming in from the same accident, and you're the best trauma physician we have. Can you do this? I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the familiar transformation that happened when duty called. The scared sister receded, and Dr. Sarah Martinez stepped forward, calm, focused, ready to save lives even when her own world was falling apart. "Yes," I said. "I can do this." The next 2 hours passed in a blur of controlled chaos. A family of 4 whose car had been hit by the same vehicle that struck Carlos. A teenage girl with internal bleeding. An elderly man with multiple fractures. I moved between trauma bays like a conductor orchestrating a symphony of survival, my hands steady even as my heart raced with worry about my brother. It wasn't until I was suturing the last patient's wounds that I allowed myself to think about what Dr. Morrison had told me. Who would want to hurt Carlos?
And why?
Dr. Martinez? Nurse Chen appeared at my elbow. Your family is asking for you, and there's a police detective who wants to speak with you about your brother. I found Detective Rivera waiting in the family consultation room with my parents. He was a tall man with kind eyes and the weathered face of someone who'd seen too much, but his expression was serious as he stood to shake my hand. Dr. Martinez, I'm sorry about your brother. I understand he's going to be okay. Yes, thank you. I sat down across from him, noting how my father's hands shook as he reached for my mother's. Dr. Morrison mentioned you found something in Carlos's car? Detective Rivera nodded, pulling out a plastic evidence bag containing a folded piece of paper. We found this in his glove compartment. It appears to be a threat. Through the clear plastic, I could see block letters written in black ink. Stop digging or your family pays the price. The words hit me like a physical blow. Digging into what? That's what we're hoping you can help us figure out. Detective Rivera leaned forward. Has Carlos mentioned anything unusual lately? Any problems at work? Any clients who might have been upset with him? I thought back over the past few weeks, trying to remember our conversations. Carlos and I talked regularly, but lately, our calls had been brief, distracted. I'd been so focused on work, on the award nomination I hadn't even known about, that I hadn't paid attention to the strain in his voice. Wait, I said suddenly. About a month ago, he mentioned something about irregularities in some client files. He said he'd found discrepancies that didn't make sense. My mother looked up sharply. He asked me about your father's old business records. From when we first came to this country. All eyes turned to my father, who had gone very pale. What kind of records? Detective Rivera asked. Immigration papers, business licenses, tax documents from the early years, my father said quietly. Carlos said he was helping a client with something similar and wanted to see how we'd handled the paperwork. Which client? I pressed. My father's hands were shaking now. Hernandez Construction. Miguel's father's company. The name hit the room like a thunderclap. Miguel Hernandez, who'd been sitting at our dinner table just hours ago, listening to my father humiliate me. Miguel, whose family had been friends with ours for over 20 years. Papa, I said slowly, what aren't you telling us? The silence stretched until it became unbearable. Finally, my father spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. When we first came here, things were difficult. The immigration process, starting the business, making ends meet. Sometimes we had to be creative with the paperwork. Detective Rivera leaned forward. What kind of creative? Nothing illegal, my father said quickly. Just bending some rules. Using connections, finding ways around bureaucracy. Everyone did it back then. And the Hernandez family? My father's shoulders sagged. We helped each other. Shared resources, shared information. If Carlos was looking into their current business practices and found connections to the old days, the pieces were falling into place with horrible clarity. Carlos had stumbled onto something while doing routine accounting work. Something that connected to old immigration irregularities, something worth threatening him over. Dr. Martinez, Detective Rivera said, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Has anyone approached you recently? Anyone asking questions about your family, your work, anything that seemed unusual? I was about to say no when a memory surfaced. Actually, yes. Last week, a man came to the hospital asking about me. He said he was a journalist writing about successful immigrant families, wanted to interview me about my career. I was too busy to meet with him, but he was very persistent. Can you describe him? Tall, maybe 45, dark hair, expensive suit. He had an accent, but I couldn't place it. He left a business card, but I tried to remember what I'd done with it. I think I threw it away. Detective Rivera made notes. We'll need to check the hospital's security footage. Dr. Martinez, I have to ask, do you feel safe? If someone was willing to hurt your brother to keep him quiet, they might see you as a threat too. The question hung in the air like smoke. I thought about my apartment, about walking to my car alone after late shifts, about how exposed I suddenly felt. I don't know, I admitted. We're going to post an officer outside Carlos's room tonight, Detective Rivera said. And I'd recommend you stay with family for the next few days while we investigate. My phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number. My hands trembled as I opened it. Your brother got lucky. You might not be. I showed the message to Detective Rivera, whose expression darkened. We need to get you somewhere safe.
Now.
But as we stood to leave, my pager went off again. Emergency in the trauma bay. Multiple casualties from another accident. The hospital needed me, and despite everything, I couldn't walk away from people who were dying. I have to go, I said, already moving toward the door. Dr. Martinez, wait. People are dying, I said firmly. This is what I do. This is who I am. As I headed back to the trauma bay, my father's voice stopped me one last time. Sarah. I turned, seeing him standing in the doorway, tears in his eyes. I was wrong, he said simply. About everything. You're not wasting your life, you're saving it. Over and over again. I'm sorry it took almost losing Carlos for me to see that. The words I'd waited 34 years to hear finally came, but they were overshadowed by the knowledge that someone wanted to hurt my family. Someone who knew our secrets, our history, our vulnerabilities. As I walked back into the controlled chaos of the emergency department, I realized that the most important case of my career wasn't waiting in a trauma bay. It was figuring out who wanted to destroy my family and why before they succeeded. The automatic doors slid shut behind me, and I stepped back into the world where I was Dr. Sarah Martinez, where I saved lives and made impossible decisions under pressure. But for the first time in my career, I wondered if my skills would be enough to save the people who mattered most. Behind me, through the glass doors, I could see my father still standing in the hallway, looking smaller and more fragile than I'd ever seen him. The man who'd spent years making me feel inadequate was now depending on me to protect our family. The irony wasn't lost on me. The daughter he'd called a failure might be the only one who could save them all.